Welcome everybody to this interesting panel we've got here tonight. I'd like to introduce Maria Speake from the company Retrouvius, which is an architectural salvage and interiors company. Aimee Betts, textile designer and maker, and Gareth Neal, a furniture maker and designer. And we're here to discuss tonight the stitched sideboard, which is this wonderful collaboration between Aimee and Gareth, which forms part of the new Craftsman's display this autumn, and also part of one of the room designs for Ways of Seeing. So I thought if we focused initially on this collaboration and talked to the two of you about what you were really hoping to gain from the experience. In other words, the suggestion came that it might be interesting for the two of you to work together, and I just wondered what you were both hoping to get out of that experience.
You want to go first?
I can go first. So as a maker with a background in embroidery, I'm always looking for ways of bringing stitch into constructed surfaces. So embroidery is often thought of as a domestic craft, which it is, and I love that about it, but it's also architectural and it could be used to create a constructed surface. So for me, I was thinking that I wanted to bring that background and tradition of embroidery into a piece of furniture.
Okay. And what were you hoping?
I'm not sure I knew what I was hoping to get from the process. I mean, obviously it was really exciting to be working with Aimee, and she's got such an amazing array of processes and techniques, and it was just wonderful to be able to kind of facilitate new ways for her to do new things, you know, and in a way that's the bit I was hoping to get something out of the process, I suppose, that had some sort of uniqueness to it, or an originality to it, and I guess that's what I'm always looking for, I suppose.
So how did you start to sort of share the languages of making that you each have in thinking about this object? You had to come up with an object, and so how did you start?
Well, I guess we talked, didn't we, first? It starts with a conversation, I suppose, and yeah, we got to know what each other have done. I was familiar with some of the mirrors and some of the products, so, and then we sort of got hands-on with the materials, really, didn't we?
Yeah, I think it was all about the materials at the very beginning, and also sort of a discussion about how we like to work at scale, and sort of it's you went away and you created these maquettes, and
yeah, I guess I started making sort of not sketchbooks, but like canvases for Aimee to apply her skills onto, and every canvas that I made would had a way to direct the process, perhaps, or in any which way that Aimee chose to direct it, but everyone was different, so she would get it, and then...
Are these some of them?
These are some of them, yeah. So we'd post
I think
these...
it's pretty interesting to look at those and see...
So I post these frames to her, and then they'd come back.
And you'd sort of think, well, does that work?
And some of them we were really excited about, and some of them showed loads of potential, and some of them just looked not very good at all. So
and so here I can see you're sort of looking at different materials and you're looking at different thicknesses, and so what were the sorts of questions you had about?
I guess one of the things, I mean, I don't want to jump in, go on, you answer, because you're the one doing this.
So we both have got a background in working with a range of materials, and I think that was really helpful. So Gareth's already worked with straw and leather and willow, and even though I'm a textile designer, I've already worked with woods and metals, sort of mixed media. So I think having that sort of shared mixed media approach, it didn't really matter so much that, you know, Gareth's furniture and I'm textiles. There was a sort of common language already, I think, but...
a sort of flexibility to be able to move between different techniques and materials and...
Yeah. I think there was definitely that element, but there was also that kind of idea of trying to create something that was really, really precious and really, really beautiful and really, really rich, but not sort of in your face rich. You know, like there's a understated
there's a sort
beauty
of restraint,
to it.
isn't there, about
And so hence some of the leathers and hence some of the brass rod ideas, and so we were trying to find that idea of what this object could hold, and you know, sometime, and that's where we kind of, the discussion, the tension perhaps was between us, and not in a bad way, in a positive way, where you'd try and, you know, discover where that harmony lay between our processes and the materials that I like and the processes that you liked, and where did that sort of sit. And that's this conversation. All these
This
are
is
that
it, really.
All these are that conversation.
Yeah, no, well, it's just so interesting to see, and this business also of joining, sort of, so conceptually, that was a really important part, was it, of the design, joining things and how you were going to do that.
Yeah, I think we wanted a lightness to it, didn't we, or a sort of delicacy. But at one point we were looking at moving, and we were just talking about the idea of timbre desks, and at one time we were thinking about how we could perhaps make so I'm going to put this beer down, how the doors could articulate, because we were really keen to make the stitch work a technique that was relevant. It wasn't an applied surface, it had a use and a function within the making of it. It wasn't something we'd just add on for the sake of it. It had a reason.
It had a structural purpose as well.
It had a reason for being. So that's why we investigated that as a kind of technique, I suppose, that particular one. But yeah. But some of these are really, really wonderful, and like amazing opportunities for other things. Like that one's just great. Yeah. How did we miss that one? Why did we do that?
Did you ever think about using it? I mean, because the piece is so exquisite, and I like your thing about the preciousness of it as well. Did you ever try and look? I mean, some of these pieces to me almost look like the leather or the processing of stitching, tying could actually have been a hinge in itself. Does that?
We had a conversation about the hinge very early on, didn't we? It's a bit of a sort of a sticking point with the sort of joinery.
I think I was a little bit. I was almost nervous of trying to hinge it with textiles or fabric, and for something that had to be work, you know.
And
robust.
I was slightly reserved.
Well, can you then tell us a little bit about the final choice of materials, how it came about that you resolved those questions?
Oh, I kind of like how that happened, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, perhaps we've got 30 ideas. You know, some of these frames were unpicked and reworked and sort of photographed, and we documented that as we went along. And eventually I sort of came again to your studio and sort of got everything out on the table, and we just had a sort of discussion, didn't we, about
we did
what we liked and what we didn't like, and the sort of the merits of each piece, and
what one idea conjured up to perhaps someone looking at it. So certain ideas would make you think of a certain thing, and then other ideas would make you be reminiscent of something else. So we honed it down. But one of the bits I really liked was when we were getting closer to homing in on it, we had all these slats, and we were trying to choose which cord to stitch it up with. And so Aimee decided to stitch each slat up with a different cord. And of course that was like, we were like trying to decide which one. We were all going, well, we really like it with lots of different chords.
Use all of them.
So that was
that's part of the kind of musical nature of the front of it, is in fact that rhythm
that's interesting.
Of colour and the threads.
It took a little while to kind of narrow that down, didn't it? But it was one of those chance bits that I mean, I think everything you do has intent and you think about it. Obviously, when you did it, you were thinking, I'm going to make this look beautiful. But I don't know whether you would...
I just like to try out the different materials. So, yeah, I wasn't thinking about the end object. It was just trying the different coloured threads. And, yeah, I wasn't seeing it as the whole at that moment. And then, but it's sort of... I think you brought that perspective to it, so and you sort of started seeing it as this sort of stripe design.
Well, that's always the great thing when you're working with somebody else, because they see something from a completely different perspective. So, and you can either be open to that or you can be closed to that. And I think, we were both really open to each other, and that helped ensure that the object evolved and wasn't two people fighting against each other, it was two people working in harmony together.
To see what could come.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the type of wood, did you know from the beginning?
Well, no. I always like to do things in pale timbers, but we didn't know. We investigated and thought about lots of different woods, but I was always very keen on ash, really.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of pleased it did. The one we actually made was in that final timber choice. But we did investigate other materials. So.
Yeah.
And actually, the slats were going to be in cedar at one point, weren't they? So it was more reminiscent of the kind of drawer bottoms of a traditional chest of drawers, and sort of. And then we were a bit worried that everyone would think of moths, if it smelt of cedar.
Well, that's the problem, that everything has a connotation, isn't it? And you don't know what it's going to trigger in somebody looking at it.
And some of those connotations when you're designing something are good, and some of them are bad. And cedar, although it's a really wonderful English timber, it does have some connotations. Yeah.
I was interested in something you have said in the past, just about the way that you two had to work, and also the way that you wanted to work, which was that I think the examples had to be postable.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about that?
I mean, we set out working in that way anyway, and then obviously as we went into lockdown, it became more a practical kind of thing as well. But yeah, the doors and the samples and the panels, because there is a cabinet maker who's making the piece, it had to be sort of logistically practical for the samples to sort of come from me to Gareth, or from me to the cabinet maker, and vice versa. So we were thinking about that process.
Yeah, and the idea that, we didn't want a cabinet being driven from one side of the country to the next, so Aimee could stitch it, and sort of at every step of the way carbon was being admitted. So, I was keen on the idea, and space is obviously a premium in artist studios, so yeah, it made good sense to kind of try and design within those kind of boundaries.
Yeah, because that's part of the sort of the ethics and the morality of the making, as well as the sort of the purely aesthetic judgments about the beauty of the objects. You need to think about the making of it, and that just interested me, because that's quite a sort of restriction in some ways.
Well, within any industry, there's always this kind of a byproduct, a bad byproduct comes from anything you make. But I think, as a modern designer, you have to think about these things, whatever you do. And I think obviously that's what the new Craftsman does so well, is that it's all UK and but even then, when you're thinking, I'm just making something in the UK, is there a way to then go that one step further, and still try and reduce emissions, or and we were talking about the ash, and one of the reasons is the ash dieback is there's a lot of ash about, and it's a beautiful timber, and a lot of it's coming down, and it has to be used or it's burnt, and so much of it's just going into compost bins and composted, it's so sad.
That's right.
So, you know, it's just, it has to be used.
Yeah.
It's not.
And the more that's invested in the using of it in
Yeah.
terms of creativity and
Yeah.
skill, the better it is.
Yeah, and there's so many bits of it that can be used. And again, we're talking about the smaller components of the cabinet, and this, you know, the smaller the bits of wood you can use, and the more that you can use from all the waste. You know, like I was taught when I started making that woodwork was 70% waste, 60 to 70% waste from anything you made. Well, that's terrible, isn't it? You think that much goes up the spout. But you think about it and you think of a tree and then you think, well, actually, we're just going to use that bit in the middle. Well, and then where's the rest of that gone?
Yeah.
You know, and actually that then happens throughout the process. So, you know, you machine a bit of wood up and then all the shavings go up the spout, and then you cut the ends off to make it to length. That goes in the, you know, it's just, so it's good to make things out of a lot of small things, because you're using up everything.
Yes.
And
tying things together or weaving things together is a way to do that, to use smaller pieces. And you look at the range of sizes of pieces here.
Yeah, and I guess that would have been prevalent, wouldn't it, across, you know, the whole of the world, really, in the way that we made things around us and used what we'd got. You know, and actually that is one of the things we need to get, well, I feel like we need to get back to. But then I've had 2 beers now.
So what, I suppose I'm asking a rather broad question now, which is just what was the most satisfying aspects of the collaboration for the two of you?
In terms of the end result, I really like the reveal of the inside of the cabinet, and I think from an embroiderer's perspective, quite often the back of the work is always preferred to the front of the work. You hear a lot of makers sort of say, oh, I really enjoy the back of the piece. So it felt like that narrative was coming in again with the cabinet, and I think we both enjoy that, sort of the inside reveal.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the backside. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, 2 beers. Damn, my tongue. Cut. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I do. I think an object should be able to work in 360 degrees. You know, and if you know you're cutting corners and not doing the reverse of an object, then you know an object should be able to sit in the middle of a room and you'll be able to walk around it and love it. So yeah.
And did it push you technically? I mean, has it sort of given you ideas? You know, for.
I mean, whenever I sort of create work, it's sort of making calculations. There was a lot of sort of calculations as you going along, not wishing to sound too rigid, but sort of the tension of the stitch is always a thing that you have to consider. So obviously, if you put too much pressure on something, it could collapse. So it's kind of those sort of technical calculations as you're going along, and the angle of the stitch work and sort of how that sits within the piece were all of the things that I sort of it's always a challenge, and sort of getting that right, and then still ending up with something that's understated as well is quite difficult balance.
Yeah, that doesn't show the strain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and there is no strain within the final outcome, but it's definitely something we sort of had to consider and talk about as we went along.
Yeah, I think you know, you always learn, don't you? You know, we're all in it, sort of constantly learning. So I think, you know, just to work with someone else, and it's just, you learn more about other processes, and then that's only going to inform my practice as I move forward. And you know, that's what you get from these things, you know, and that's why just working on your own it's nice at times, but it's just great to enrich your practice, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And Maria, what do you see in the stitch sideboard that for you offers potential for interiors, or just the qualities of it? What is it that you see in it?
Well, I suppose I never think of, because I rarely think about one object. It's about how relationships of pieces sit together. And so initially, when we were looking at pieces that work together from the new Craftsman's whole kind of collection, it was, trying to sort of get yourself into it's not really a fantasy, but the world in which, the environment in which you're trying to create, and the objects how they talk to each other. So for me, it starts holistically, and then you look into the sort of individual pieces and so to begin with, actually I was drawn in relation to the straw and with the Orkney chair and how this more stitching that goes on. And then that immediately made complete sense in terms of the sideboard piece. But there were lots of elements within the sideboard, which you've slightly picked up on, that I thought felt relevant to now, but had a very nice contextual relationship to the process of vernacular. It still feels like it's a very modern, crisp piece, but to me, I feel like there's a whole sense of language, of vernacular that goes on in it, how materials are joined, that junction. Completely the ash, I was sort of thrilled by that, because I am, as we all should be, totally traumatized by what's actually happening to our landscape. I mean, what we know and countryside that we see all the time that we're so familiar with. I mean, some of us might even remember, Dutch elm disease, and actually how traumatic that was on the changing of our landscape, and paintings which you look at now that sort of don't really quite make sense, and you realise it's because they've got whopping great big elm trees in them, which some of us don't even know what that form is anymore. And you live in fear of thinking, oh my God, it's the ash next. Anyway, so the idea of knowing that so much of this material is about, my background or my interest is always in what has been rejected, what is thought of as waste or rubbish or unwanted for whatever reasons. Someone might have got a bit carried away with their Marie Kondo and cleared things out, or it could simply be on a much bigger scale, from demolition, strip out to, we need to, develop this site, whatever it might be. And also, you don't see much ash furniture historically. We're really used to dealing in reclaimed materials. And, I was explaining to Gareth that, we've salvaged, reclaimed floors, and we've had hundreds of sort of teak, mahoganies, oaks, all of those. I've never, ever once had a reclaimed ash floor, and actually even within materials. So it's sort of what materials are fashionable and where. So it feels great that something that is in the decline in the natural world is going to therefore be allowed to be elevated within, potentially within our homes. And not in a nasty 1980s veneered kind of way. It's always a bit worrying. And then I think what's also happening in more and more and more within the interiors world is that we need, we're, as people, we are obsessed with change. And the ability, lockdown has probably made us rearrange our houses and our rooms 20 million times in the process of I'm actually going to work here today, or I'm going to try. And I think it's made you rediscover relationships to pieces of furniture and what that piece of furniture is. And I think that fashion for everything being built in, now there's a place for it, but actually having a piece of furniture which can move. I mean, it's an enormous investment, you know, doing anything within an interior. So if it can then move, change, come with you when you move to another house, get handed down to your children or whatever it might be, that, you know, I think is becoming more and more relevant again, which also brings back the thing that you were talking about seeing the backside. It is the, you know, it being able to come away from the wall and, you know, which almost was why I was thinking, oh, it would be nice to have doors on both sides.
Well, we did.
Oh, I bet.
We did really want to do it. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Well, you know, but I think it will be relevant. That next one, range 2.
Well, actually, that sort of brings me on slightly to this other question, which is, presumably when you're making a piece, you don't actually have a specific interior in mind. But maybe you do. I mean, that you're focused on the problem solving and on the experimenting. But do you have an idea of where? Because clearly Maria thinks in sort of scenarios, in the sort of the relationships between objects, but you're very much focused on just the object. I just wondered whether you'd thought of a context or whether it was just that was the perfect solution for the particular problem you were addressing.
I think my approach is I guess comes down to my own home in some respects, and would I want to live with it? And so, you know, I make sure that the things that I make are things that I would really want to live with. And so it sort of centres around my own sort of interior, I suppose. And yeah, if it doesn't tick those bills, then I probably wouldn't make it. There was a time when perhaps I wasn't thinking like that. But now I am a homeowner, I think more like that. So I think that's perhaps where my process comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. You would want to live with the object yourself, but one of the reasons I selected the chords that we're working with is that there is optionality within that range as well. So if a client was to come and they got a specific colourway, then we can also work with that. So it's a versatile piece as well. So hopefully it should slot into lots of different environments as well.
Yes. And you couldn't see that as
Yeah, totally. I loved all that. I loved the fact that you had the different stitch, you know, the leather, the hemp. What's the other one?
Wax cotton cord.
Wax cotton cord. That's for the barber lovers out there. I mean, you know, I just think, and the potential of colour and form, and I think it's really interesting. Also, it's one of those pieces that you're interested in knowing how it's going to age. I mean, we probably won't be around, and it will still be around, and that's always a brilliant thing, because again, that ties in with the sort of the second-hand, the sort of antique world, you know, those pieces that have carried on. I'd love to see how it does age, because I think, you know, you like a bottom, I like a saggy bottom.
And do you think that sort of value in an object that makes it heritable and cherishable over generations and so on comes partly through it being crafted? I mean, obviously we're sitting here, so we tend to believe that, but that if you are thinking about an interior, you would recognise that a crafted object brings that kind of value into a space.
And also what I love about it is because of the philosophy and the way that it's been made means that it could also be put with older pieces that have been made with the same sort of thought process, rather than something that's chipboard or painted MDF. You know, that would feel, but you know, an 18th century chest or an Italian cassone or something, you know, those, they work because they're made with the same sense of personality or relationship.
Yes, even though the aesthetic might be very different,
totally
but
different.
it's the sort of the care and the relationship to materials and to making that goes into both.
And making with what you have around.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what I like about it, which was what I was saying before about the idea of it feels like there's an understanding of a vernacular, which I think is something which is sort of slightly deeply embedded in us, which is why you are drawn to much earlier pieces of furniture occasionally, because they're so raw and simple and, and it is that thing of, oh my God, how and why have they connected this piece together?
And as you say, it's also relating the inside and the outside, and so the particular landscape, the fact that it's ash, and so it comes from a particular landscape, and that chair, obviously the materials and the location of the object. And I suppose that we treasure that sense of the vernacular even when a piece is moved far beyond that context, but that we sense it still.
I think that it's very emotional within us in a kind of unknown way.
I really like what you're suggesting, like say in 100 years' time, that it could also be repaired, that someone who inherited it could say if a panel was to become damaged, they could swap it out quite easily and repair it like a jumper. So using the materials of that time, there's that is possible with this piece. So that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that until now. Yeah.
No, that's really nice. I might use it with plastic electric thread or something.
There'll be plenty of that.
There'll be plenty of that,
Yeah. And so what about collaborations in general for the two of you? You do a lot of collaborations.
Yeah, it has become part of my practice, and I do like them when they come along, but I think they've got to be right.
Yeah.
So, it's quite, it's just critical that there's a shared values in what you do, and I guess that's really important. So I haven't got another one on the go at the moment, but I'm always open. Email me.
I thought it was really impressive how you had done all of this collaboratively during lockdown.
Yeah.
I think that was, I thought that sort of adds a really nice positivity to the piece of at moments where we're being separated. The whole piece is all about connection. And, I don't know, I sort of, it just started making me think about how lots of other pieces could be made from pieces that get sent. That you could be sent lots of different things. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's anyway.
Yeah, it was definitely something positive to focus on during that time, which was really good.
Yeah, and also to come, as restrictions are lifted, the most exciting bit about an object is seeing the finished object. Is what one is coming up with the ideas or doing the preliminary, but then that bit in the middle I find a bit of a like that's difficult. And so actually the end result is the best bit. So when you lay your eyes on it and you've had a bit of time to separate yourself from it, and then you get the reward. So that's been really nice to come out of lockdown and suddenly we've had a bit of space from all that work, and there she lies, so...
well, she'll be so interesting when she goes to lots of, when eventually gets to different environments and you see them there. And actually even when you first put something in, it always takes pieces a bit of time to bed in. I mean, I go into a state of sort of panic at the beginning. I mean, you've done the building work, you've put in certain pieces of furniture and you're just like, because it's a bit like that awkward bit at a party at the beginning where everyone's not quite sure if they can chat and how do we nuzzle along all right, and then suddenly it's all 5-6 months later everyone's sort of bedded in a bit more and you're just like, oh, lovely. You can go back.
Yeah, and I think if an object has the ability to age well in that scenario, then it's only going to get more beautiful, and it's the things that when they take a knock or when they take a blow, they suddenly look imperfect and they can't handle a bit of imperfection.
They can't handle a bit of damage.
Then that's a difficult life you've got to lead with your interior. And, you know, I mean, some people are very good at it, but it wouldn't be for me. It's got to take a...
No, and as you suggest, that the potential that the cabinet has to be a good conversationalist is there. In other words, it has ways of talking to other bits of furniture, and that you can sort of see how they would fit together. And
yeah, I mean, it was just lovely to see the compositions, and you know, to understand, you know, how you know, they can work in so many different scenarios, you know, for so many different types of people. And you're seeing the black one.
Yes, well, exactly.
You know,
right.
is you know, it's going to look really graphical and really modern and really kind of bold and punchy, and you know, that's really exciting.
But especially if you see it in I mean, at the moment I'm working on various Suffolk properties with their sort of black tarred lap boarding, and you know, it's when you start to remember where colouring within timbers and whatever come from, and why they age in different ways. So you can still put something very crisp in it, but it feels right for its exterior context, whatever. Anyway, you know, that's by the by. Sorry.
No, but that's right. But if each is true to its origin in a way, then they can have an authentic conversation.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I mean, it's exciting to think about that, you know, especially Suffolk and materials of location. It all becomes,
Yeah, no, I think that's part of the fun about, you know, learning about what materials feel right in a place, and you know, that I think that as designers is part of our responsibility. You know, getting to understand what is around, and sorry.
And do you find your clients are more and more conscious of kind of the idea of what materials come from from that local landscape?
I think there's two things. There's the consciousness of, as you were talking about before, the transportation.
Yeah.
You know, just trying to minimise that. So this. You know, obviously we're working a lot with salvage materials, so you know, we'll quite often start by going to local salvage yards and local buildings to just understand what the right patterner is. Not that you want to create a slavish, time warped, you know, we don't want to be living in a hovel or whatever, you know, it still wants to have its underfloor heating and it's pumped up with insulation and all those things that make it relevant and responsible, but yeah, I've gone off on a tangent. I can't remember what I'm talking about.
About locality.
Oh yes, locality completely. Yes, I suppose that's what I call vernacular is locality.
Yeah.
And learning about the different materials. But it's also incredible how environmentally the context in what you can grow in different places, and how, I mean, what's so boring about agriculture in Britain now is how limited it is in terms of what we actually grow. And, you know, you talking about flax and hemp and all of the, you know, there's so little of it grown here in comparison to what there used to be, and there's so much straw. But actually, what are we really doing with straw? We had that moment where there were a few straw-baled houses going around, but you know, it's actually, why aren't we, you know, it used to be used much more as an insulation material. It's got so much big woven potential. Come on.
I can answer why though, because they reduce the height that straw grows, so it doesn't blow over in the wind. Yeah. And actually, in the olden days, the straw used to be a lot taller, and we cut it differently now. So the process itself lays to waste the sheath of the straw. Yeah. So actually in Orkney, the straw is grown traditionally with a long stalk, is not the right word, stem, and cut with a traditional combine harvester. So, you know, and that's not, you know, so you can actually use
So it's usable.
99% of the product.
Yeah, well, we've been working with a thatcher and they hand cut.
Yeah, that would be the other way to go about it.
So that's their way to maximise the length.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely marvellous when you see fields stacked.
Yeah, it's just beautiful, yeah.
It's, anyway.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to invite questions from the audience? Would anybody like to ask a question of our expert panel?
I would just like to ask a little bit about the actual place that you have created.
Oh, yeah.
It's an imaginary place, but it's actually a real place.
It's a sort of real place, and it was. I found it quite difficult. The concept of ways of seeing was rather marvellous, but I suppose I'm quite limited in the way that we're so, we work about a place, and so you were saying, oh, Emma Burns is doing this marvellous Vita Sackville West inspired space. Tom Bartlett's doing this sort of urban blah blah blah, and I was thinking, shit, what am I going to do? Anyway, and so I was also looking at the context of all the other materials within the new Craftsmen particularly, and thinking, well, let's look at another rural, slightly more wilder rural environment. And we happen to be working on a project right up in the Outer Hebrides. And that felt there was a lot of pieces and materials and sort of philosophies that are behind the pieces here that felt like it made sense, that a lot would fit very comfortably. I've never seen, that blue and green coming out of the window, I'd say is a relatively rare experience up there. But I think there was a lot inspired, as I said earlier, about the Orkney chair, but not wanting to be sort of slavishly saying, oh, here I want to put an Orkney chair in it. It was like, what I like about it is how the back is made, and that I just thought, well, that would make a really wonderful kitchen. I like the idea that it breathes well, and I think, up there where you're so desperate for light, I thought how the light could work within the straw. Anyway, so here we are in Hebridean, quite raw landscape.
Lovely. Question. Aimee, you spoke earlier about kind of doing custom stitching and embroidery and things like that for a particular client. They had a brief or an interior. What would be kind of the most exciting or ultimate brief that an interior designer could give you with a great sort of inspiration and kind of starting point? Is a colour palette, or what would you love to do?
Well, I think more and more over time I'm sort of scaling up. So I used to do very tiny work, like you could almost not see it. You had to, colleagues of mine were like, I have to wear my glasses to look at that. So I've gone sort of from, tiny work, and then it's sort of some mid-scale pieces now. And I think there's so much potential for stitch in a sort of architectural, to be part of the actual fabric of the building as well. So just, let's integrate it into the actual structure of the building. Would be nice.
That's what I liked about when you were talking about the collaboration, that you work at one-to-one. I think that makes such a difference. I never understand a maquette. I mean, I just, it's this, and that's why I like working with salvage, because, you're salvaging the stuff, it's there. It also tends to be finite. So, you already have, because we all need a few limitations. So you've already got a bit of limitation in, the existing size or whatever of that piece. But, one-to-one, and definitely textiles, stitching, big scale, I think it's brilliant.
We need an enormous needle.
We could make one. We'd have to design the needle first.
Well, it then just rests with me to thank the panel. So thank you, Gareth, thank you, Aimee, and thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks so much.